Oh, right. You.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the first 2 episodes of Agatha all along.
And I killed Sparky, too.
Now, before we get rolling into this episode, I want to let you guys know about a couple of big announcements. Tickets are now on sale for our live show tour, where you can meet me and the team in person, do some trivia, have some special guests, and we're going to see exclusive videos. The dates and links are below. And we also have a new ScreenCrush Discord that is a lot of fun. I'm on there all the time, the vibes are very cool, and it's a chance for us to nerd out together. The links for everything are below. So I am going to assume that all of you have seen WandaVision, so I'm not going to spend too much time recapping the show. But if you do need a recap, we posted one a couple of days for you. But I do want to go over a little bit of Agathas history from the comics, because that's going to help you understand the deep Marvel lore that this show is drawing from. Now, in the comics, Agatha Harkness started out as the nanny to Franklin Richards, the son of Reed and Sue Richards. After several issues of her just acting mysteriously, it was revealed that she was a witch. The Fantastic Four even went with her to the mystical community of New Salem, Colorado, where Agatha is from. The community was ruled by her son, Nicholas Scratch, and her grandchildren, the Salem Seven, who appear in episode 2 and are hunting Agatha in this show. Then Agatha becomes a mentor to Wanda Maximoff, helping her to hone her chaos magic abilities. And then it gets really weird. Agatha returns to New Salem, where Nicholas Scratch and the Salem Seven burn her at the stake, but her spirit energy escapes into Wanda, and Wanda helps use that energy to conceive her 2 sons. I mean, later it was revealed that they were shards of Mephisto, which is why comic book fans thought Mephisto was going to be in WandaVision.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast!
But even in WandaVision, it seemed like Agatha was encouraging Wanda to create new life when she told Wanda to start family planning.
Dottie is the key to everything in this town. Country club memberships, parties, school admissions.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Agatha later becomes a ghost who follows Wanda around as she solves crimes in the excellent Scarlet Witch series by James Robinson and a Murderer's Row of great artists. And we're going to talk about that series a little bit later in the video. Agatha in the MCU is pretty different. She still wears purple and her mother maiden crone brooch, but she's also more of a straight-up antagonist for Wanda. In the comics, she's more of a mysterious figure whose motives you can't trust. Oh, and I guess in the comics, she looks like this now. So there is a new Marvel television intro, which is blessedly shorter than the very long Marvel Studios intro. Notice how it's made to look like an old tube television, which scans lines and pixels, which could be a tribute to WandaVision's iconic end credits. Now, you'll remember that WandaVision ended with Wanda trapping Agatha in the persona of Agnes, the nosy neighbor.
Hiya, hun.
And it seems like, since then, Agatha has been creating different TV scenarios for herself. The first episode begins with her recreating the excellent Kate Winslet series, Mayor of Eastown. Now, Mayor of Eastown follows a detective in a small town who investigates a murder of a young woman who was found in the woods, just like the corpse in this episode. Agatha begins the episode humming a tune, which is actually both the score to the show, and in episode 2, we hear that it's the Ballad of the Witch's Road.
Down the witch's road.
So even in her television fugue state, Agatha's mind is drifting towards her old life and the desire to rewalk the Witch's Road. Now, I am so excited to dive back into the story that WandaVision set up. I still think it's the greatest Marvel TV show, but it wasn't just about a superhero, it was about the psychology of trauma and grief. The show was released at the height of COVID-19 when I was going through a lot of trauma and grief myself, and I'm sure a lot of you were too. And it's insane how long I let a lot of those feelings fester before I finally dealt with them through therapy with BetterHelp, the sponsor of this video. I connected with a great therapist through BetterHelp, and in the very first day, she pointed out things about myself that I never realized, which have changed how I interact with people in my everyday life. Therapy helped me to address my work-life balance and overcome the social anxiety that I've had ever since the pandemic. After a few sessions, when I was really laying out my social fears, my therapist asked me, well, then what would happen? And I realized that a lot of the things I was worrying about were not going to be the end of the world for me. It was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I never would have been able to start therapy without BetterHelp, because they make therapy easier. It's an online platform where clients and therapists can communicate. I used it for video chat, but I was also sent worksheets that helped me work through my problems. They also have services like a reflection journal and group sessions on a number of different topics. Starting is so easy. You fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist in as little as 2 days. And if the therapist isn't right for you, you can switch until you find the right person. They also carefully make sure that therapists on the platform are well qualified and their customer support team is there to help if you have any questions. BetterHelp has more than 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, so this is a platform that you can trust. So if you're struggling and you think you'd benefit from a therapy session, click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/ScreenCrush for a discount on your first month of therapy. Now, back to Agatha. Now, she's greeted at the crime scene by her neighbor Herb. Now remember, he was Wanda's neighbor in WandaVision, who was first mind controlled by Wanda and then later by Agatha.
She came here because...
So the end of this episode reveals that Agatha has just been walking around talking to people like she's in a crime show, which means that for this whole conversation with Herb, they were actually standing at the fence line in Herb's garden. It's very hilarious when you rewatch this scene knowing this.
When the chief calls and tells me hibernation's over, got a case only you can solve.
What?
Now, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness showed us Wanda being driven insane by the influence of the Darkhold, the evil book of the Chaos God Chthon. Now, in a moment of lucidity, Wanda destroys the Darkhold in every reality, but then Wundagore Mountain fell onto her head. But we saw her Wundagore Shrine in Deadpool and Wolverine in the Void, which raised some doubts about whether or not she is actually gone forever, which Agatha addresses here.
She is dead, though, isn't she, Herb?
Oh, she's really most sincerely dead.
Never know.
Notice that Wanda, the corpse, is wearing the same hoodie she wore in the WandaVision finale. Her fingers are blackened from using the Darkhold, like what we saw happen to Agatha in WandaVision and to Wanda in Multiverse of Madness. She has died from blunt trauma to the head from a book called Dialogue and Rhetoric, Known History of Learning and Debate. And as Agatha later pieces together, the first letters of the title spell out Darkhold, because it was possession of the Darkhold that killed Wanda and the reason she dropped a mountain onto her own head. And our editor Harriet Lengel-Enright pointed out that the author of the book, Andrew Hugo, is actually an anagram for Wundagore, the mountain where Wanda died. So the rules of magic established by the MCU say that when a witch is trapped between runes, only the witch who cast those runes could break their spell. This is why Agatha is still trapped within her own mind. But however, it is possible to break out of a spell once the caster is dead. But it's difficult to do this, as Doctor Strange told Ebony Maw in Infinity War.
You'll find removing a dead mouse spell troublesome.
This is why, following Wanda's death, Agatha is able to break free. And here's a little detail that I liked.
But right now, this unidentified woman lying dead in a creek has just got me down in the dump.
Now, crick is a rural way to say creek. So even though Agatha is filling this character with silly cliches, like carrying a coffee cup to a crime scene, Kathryn Hahn chose this character choice that is spot on for this area. The opening theme is the Ballad of the Witch's Road that we also hear in episode 2, the same theme that Agatha was humming to herself. But the opening credits have reimagined the song like the opening credits to a show like The Wire, as singer Matthew Mayfeld reinvents the tune with a gravelly Tom Waits style. The intro also seems to take cues from prestige dramas like True Detective. So the intro features the Welcome to Westview sign that we saw in WandaVision and features the visual of the yellow crime tape leading into the woods.
Down, down, down the road, down the winding road.
So this is reminiscent of the yellow brick road that Dorothy walked to get to Oz. Now this is appropriate since Agatha's journey to the road in episode 2 is very much like the Wizard of Oz. She even calls Joe Locke's character.
This is my familiar Toto.
So this entire intro is essentially a recreation of Mayor of Easttown's second episode, where Kate Winslet investigates a murder in a crick. But this is not just a cool Easter egg. Agatha is trying to escape her own mind by taking on the role of an investigator. I also loved this gag that the show is based on the Danish series WandaVision.
There it is! There it is!
Now, Agatha has conjured up sitcom intros before, like when she filled Wanda's head with this incredible earworm.
And I killed Sparky, too.
Then she enters the Westview Library, which you'll remember was the location where the Visions had their final face-off. Now, that encounter set up the upcoming series Vision Quest, which I am very excited about because of the involvement of Picard Season 3 showrunner Terry Matalas. Now, the librarian is Dottie. You remember her.
Dottie is the key to everything in this town.
Now, we thought she might have been Mephisto, but she was just a concerned mom.
My name is Sarah. I have a daughter. She's 8. Maybe she could be friends with your boys.
Agatha learns that the book was stolen 3 years ago, just like how the Darkhold was stolen by Wanda 3 years ago. And then she finds the burned shelf of other copies, because Wanda destroyed the Darkholds in every reality. And I just want to quickly flag that all of this Mayor of Eastown fantasy stuff just looks great. I don't know how the fake part of Agatha all along looked better than the entirety of the show's Secret Invasion, but there you have it. And I also want to note something here, that some of the things that Agatha hears in her fantasy are definitely the neighbors talking. But moments like this are Agatha's subconscious telling her the Darkholds have been destroyed. Now there's an important moment later on where this happens, but I'll get to that in a bit. Right now, I am so excited to show you guys this new Agatha parody merch that we designed for our merch store. There's this, it'll be a gas shirt, and the Get On Loser, We're Flying the Cursed Road.
Get in, loser, we're going shopping.
We love designing these shirts for you guys, and shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel. Again, the links are below. So the police chief was also a background actor in WandaVision, and he tells her,
there were traces of a particular microbial sediment only found in Eastern Europe.
And this is interesting. So Mount Wundagore, where Wanda apparently died, is in Eastern Europe, you know, where Wanda is originally from. But Chief Proctor wouldn't have known that information, which means that Agatha subconsciously sensed that Wanda died on Mount Wundagore, and she knows that that moment means that she can now be free from Wanda's spell. Later, we see her almost jarred from her fantasy when she starts to spell out Darkhold. Then Aubrey Plaza's Rio Duvall shows up as an FBI agent, and she's actually known as the Green Witch. Now, this is a new character invented for the MCU, but I think she could be a version of the Emerald Warlock, who is kind of like Wanda's archenemy in the comics. She fights him when she walks the Witch's Road in Scarlet Witch issue 4. Rio emerges as a character in Agatha's fantasy, kind of like how Agatha became a character in Wanda's fantasy. Then Agatha goes to meet Norm. Remember him?
Afternoon, everybody. Oh, Norm!
Actually, different Norm. And then he tells her about her pendant. Now, Agatha wore this pendant of the Mother, Maiden, and Crone in every episode of WandaVision. As we said at the time, Mother, Maiden, and Crone are seen as the three facets of womanhood, which of course they mock in this show.
What, no working professional goddess?
But they also represent the phases of the moon, and this deity is often tied to the source of a witch's power. We see this occurring throughout myth and stories, most notably is the three witches in Macbeth. Now, the locket has a bit of hair inside, which emotionally affects Agatha in episode 2. So I want to throw out a theory here. This hair belongs to Rio, and Rio is actually Agatha's ex-girlfriend. Now there are other facts to support this, which I'm going to talk about a little later. Now in this episode, Agatha enters the room of this detective's dead child, kind of similar to Mayor in Mayor of Easttown, who suffered a family tragedy before the show starts. But maybe on this show, the lost child was actually her son, Nicholas Scratch, who was turned into this rabbit, Senior Scratchy. The bedroom of a dead kid could also represent Wanda losing her kids, since the last time she saw her boys was in their bedroom. Now we see here that Agnes's dead kid was named Nicholas Scratch, also her son's name in the comics. Not for nothing, but this is also a nickname for the devil. Now in the comics and in this show, Agatha does have a familiar, a rabbit named Senior Scratchy. Now in the comics, her familiar is a cat named Ebony who transforms into a monster. And in WandaVision's deleted 10th episode, the boys Monica and Darcy would have faced off against a rabbit that changes shape. So maybe it'll turn out that Senior Scratchy is actually Agatha's son Nicholas, who was turned into a rabbit. In fact, we do see a bronze rabbit in this room, which supports this theory. When Rio arrives, Agatha mentions a wreck in Eastview. Now, this could be a subtle nod toward the Wicked Witch of the Westview, Agatha, and the Wicked Witch of the Eastview, Rio, continuing this Wizard of Oz symbolism that we see in the credits. And then Joe Locke's mysterious character breaks into the house. Now, ever since he was cast, there has been speculation that he was playing a grown-up version of Wanda's son, Billy.
But didn't he fade away into space dust?
Yes, but in the comics, something similar happens. Wanda realizes that she conjured up her boys and they were never real. And yet, their essence was preserved and they were reincarnated as like superpowered teens. Very long story. The grown-up Billy and Tommy were founding members of the Young Avengers, which I really hope Marvel is still planning on making since they have been seeding this movie or show for years. Now, in the comics and in WandaVision, Billy has powers similar to his mom, but he also takes a long time to realize who he really is. He and other Avengers go off to find Wanda in a great comic called The Children's Crusade, which again, I really hope they adapt in the MCU. So Billy's interrogation is what finally snaps Agatha out of her stupor. He admits to her that the pictures of the dead body are actually flowers and the two-way mirror is just a painting. But at first, he plays along with this fantasy.
When you say decorated, do you mean suspended without pay?
So something about Billy's presence gradually pulls Agatha from her fantasy. This happens after she notices his black fingertips, but this is actually reminding her of the effects of the Darkhold.
That's why I saved you from the spell you were under.
And this makes me think that one of Wanda's last acts with the Darkhold could have been to save her boys' souls and give them new lives. When she goes to the morgue, she wills Wanda's body into existence, and then she sees a library card for a toe tag, and she makes a point to call Wanda's hair Scarlet, as in
The Scarlet Witch.
When Rio pulls Agatha out of her fantasy, we see her slip between several costumes from WandaVision. The Modern Family version, Malcolm in the Middle with, Juicy written on the butt, and the 80s hair with leg warmers, and finally, to her original black and white design. Now, when she's finally freed, she sees her own name on the Darkhold library card because she had the book out before Wanda. She emerges from the house nude, which is important for a few reasons. One, she is being born again, being born nude just like we all are, and this nudity shows her new freedom. But also, the young women accused of being witches at Salem were said to have been seen dancing naked in the woods. So Agatha regaining her autonomy while nude is showcasing her taking control over her own identity and body. Outside, Herb is working on his garden, just like he did in WandaVision, and he tells Agatha how they all cope with the events of that show.
Wanda. Ooh, we try not to say her name.
Ugh. Because you're cowards.
And she gets angry with him when he implies that she is the busybody neighbor from the sitcom Fantasy.
Well, you mostly been a good neighbor, a bit too casual with your boundaries.
Call me nosy, I'll cut out your tongue.
Herb tries to give her a purple shirt, her favorite color, and she realizes that Wanda sapped away all of her powers. So now, instead of having a spell dungeon, her basement is just a basement. And then Rio shows up and reveals that Agatha has been hiding behind the Darkhold's magic for years as she traveled the world stealing power from other witches.
Oh yeah, but then she messed around and found out.
That's right, but now the Salem 7, who burned her at the stake in the comics, are coming to collect the bill. But Agatha talks her into a stay of execution.
Don't you want me at my best?
Oh yeah, like in Hook, when Tinkerbell gets Captain Hook to give her 3 days to train Peter Pan into remembering that he is a proper Pan.
Oh my god, it is like Hook. High five! She talks about the fates of various witches, which is how young women accused of witchcraft were murdered in real life. And now, to break down the end credits, here is Brianna McLarty.
Thanks, Ryan. So there is a ton of references in the credits, so let's just get straight into it. So first we see an old-timey newspaper clipping about the Salem witch trials, and there's also this book with several witchy references. At the top there's an excerpt of the Ballad of the Witch's Road, which they sing in the next episode. And below there's an excerpt explaining earth magic, which says, "In order to connect to the power of the earth, you must touch your feet to the soil and channel her divine magic through you." Which is why the Coven all remove their shoes when they get on the Witch's Road in the next episode. Then we see a Google search of the Witch's Road, and the second result is Lorna Wu, the rock star we hear about in the next episode.
Lorna Wu? As in Lorna Wu in the Coral Shore?
And then we see an Agatha-styled rendition of the Bewitched title card, which was a 1960s sitcom that was referenced several times in WandaVision. Then we see George H. Walker's witch trial in Salem, Massachusetts, arguably the most famous depiction of the event. The next drawing is actually a political cartoon called State Witches Laying a Spell Over the Country. And get this, each witch represents a key figure in passing the Reform Act of 1832, and this one's even the Queen herself. And then we get another depiction of the Salem witch trials. This one was simply titled The Witch Number 2. Then we see this image, which is from the 1916 sheet music book by J. Delancey. And then finally we move out of illustration into actual film, with the witch from the classic 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Next we see a crow, and in episode 2, Agatha sees a crow and she's like very disturbed by it. Throughout the show there's talk of familiars, so my guess is that a crow is a familiar for one of the Salem 7, the group that's hunting Agatha. And that explains why we get another image of the Salem witch trials. Remember, in WandaVision it was revealed that the Salem witch trials were carried out by witches themselves. And then we see a picture of Irene Ray, a woman who was accused of witchcraft in 1938, which is way too late for that to be happening. Also behind her there's a newspaper clipping talking about the hex titled Examining the Anomaly. Next we see a depiction of the Wizard of Oz. See, that's Dorothy was the Cowardly Lion, but it's overlain with text that says Cotton Mather and Witchcraft. Cotton Mathers was a clergyman who helped propagate the hysteria around the Salem witch trials. He's actually one of the most famous figures of the Salem witch trials. Then we see Lisa from The Simpsons dressed up as a witch, which I love. What a cool little pop culture reference. Then we see a witch walking away from the camera. I couldn't find any direct match for this, so I think this might be a new image for the show. And notice how it looks all wonky at the edges, the same way the hex looked when Wanda walked out of it. So this could represent how Agatha is escaping her own personal hex. Next we see this image, which is from a short story magazine called The Black Cat. Then we see a depiction of a Zodiac man from a medieval manuscript. A zodiac man is a diagram which depicts which parts of the body connect to each zodiac sign. So this belief was practiced in tandem with medicine. Then we see a scene from the witchy cult classic, The Craft. Great watch for Halloween, highly recommend. There's also reference to Ouija boards. This lettering is the classic Ouija style lettering, and these three girls are actually holding a planchette. Then we see a reference to Wicked with an Elphaba doll and sheet music. And there's a blink and you miss it excerpt from an article about Wanda and the Hex. I think this is the same article we saw earlier. Then we see crystals. Now, crystals are key elements of modern day witchcraft. It's believed each crystal has different properties and frequencies that can be channeled and help with everything from healing to protection. Then we see this headline, Can You Talk to the Dead? Followed by a pentagram summoning circle, which burns away to show the hex. So this implies that the hex was basically one giant summoning circle for Vision. Remember, Wanda didn't know she was practicing magic, but she was. Agatha confirmed it. So she intuitively created the summoning circle so she could perform the spell. And then we get a tarot layout. Now, tarot is going to be very important to this show. And I want to thank ScreenCrush's own Elias Kanoriakis for all of the great tarot catches he made throughout the show. He really helped me break this down. So Lilia mentioned earlier the Three of Pentacles, which represents teamwork and foundational structures. And of course, they'll need teamwork to complete the Witch's Road. And you could even say the hex itself is a foundational structure. But Lilia also referred to Jennifer as the High Priestess, which is a major arcana card. And in this tarot layout, there's 5 cards that surround the magician. This layout makes me think that by the end of the season, each character will represent a tarot card. And then we get this funny image of all of these witches paddleboarding. Now, this is a real thing. You can just go paddleboard dressed up as a witch. There's meetings across America. And of course, the last thing we see along with the title is the fabled Witch's Road, where we're going to spend most of the season. Thanks, Ryan, for letting me break that down, and back to you for episode 2.
So now let's break down episode 2, Circle Some with Fate to Unlock the Hidden Gate. Now, if you haven't noticed yet, the episode's titles are taken from the song Ballad of the Witch's Road. The first episode was about Agatha breaking out of her stupor to find the gate, and this episode is about the gate to that road being unlocked. Now, the Witch's Road comes from the comic Scarlet Witch issue 4. Just like in the show, it's a plane of existence where only witches and sorcerers can enter. We learn that Agatha is the only witch who walked it to completion, or at least one of the few. And at the end, you get... In Agatha's case, maybe she gained the ability to steal power from other witches. Now, in the comics, the Witch's Road is tied heavily to the multiverse. It exists in another universe where it is ruled by the Scarlet Queen, likely a variant of Wanda Maximoff who is older. This episode has another tie to the multiverse and the excellent Werewolf by Night special that I'll go over a little bit later. So, when he tries to tell Agatha his name, this happens.
Who are you? My name is...
Again, I would not be shocked if this kid turns out to be Billy Maximoff. It even looks like the letter M is scrolled over his mouth. Now for me, the mystery isn't if this is Billy, it's how this is Billy, and if it means the Scarlet Witch is alive. So I'm just going to keep either calling him Billy or Toto. It's also interesting how Agatha can't hear his name or hear him talk when he describes his past.
I was born...
So, 2 things. 1, this implies that he is alive through Wanda's magic, and that Agatha is still being affected by Wanda's spell. To that point, his name being bleeped reminded me of this.
Mr. Steve.
In Kill Bill, Beatrice Kiddo's name was being bleeped only for the audience. The characters in the movie hear her name just fine. So in the case of Agatha all along, this is implying that Agatha and the audience are each spectators of this show. WandaVision was groundbreaking for how it flirted with the fourth wall. Characters were literally watching the show that we were watching. And this all makes me wonder how much of the series is actually happening, or if Agatha is still under someone's spell. For instance, I loved moments where she sees this reality behind her fantasy, like the makeshift car.
And this is not a car.
As I mentioned earlier, the Witch's Road first appeared in the excellent Scarlet Witch Limited series. In that series, Wanda is trying to atone for her past sins, when she killed several Avengers, rewrote reality, and wiped out the mutant race with 3 words. Also in that series, she investigates paranormal crimes. But interestingly enough, when she walks the Witch's Road, she meets her true mother, a witch named Natalia Maximoff. So, you'd never know, Billy could rediscover his mother on this road, or at the very least, uncover evidence that she is still alive, which could then be the story for Vision Quest or Young Avengers. So to walk the Witch's Road, Agatha has to reassemble a coven because, as she says,
No, those harpies are dust.
Her last coven being dust could be alluding to the Salem flashbacks that we saw in WandaVision. In the car, the kid gets a call from his boyfriend, further evidence that he is Billy Maximoff, because in the comics, Billy is gay. In fact, his relationship with Hulkling is the anchor of the Young Avengers books. When Agatha leaves the house, we see the foundation of the house that Vision bought for Wanda, where she started her Westview spell. This is why Agatha gives her a little spit. And guys, I really hope these two characters get to meet up again in the future someday. Now, I really dug this first episode, but the second one felt like, just a lot of chess pieces moving around the board as they go through the motions of getting the band back together. But oh my god, what a band. Broadway legend Patti LuPone plays Lilia, a divination witch. So all the witches from the Coven are pulled from deep lore in the comics. Lilia is descended from the very first Baron of Mordo, this guy's ancestor. She grew to be centuries old and part of a witch coven that owned the Book of Cagliostro, the same book that we see in Doctor Strange.
This one's got pages missing.
That's the Book of Cagliostro, study of time.
So she used this book to see the future, which is her gift in the show. Now, I think that when Lilia has these episodes, she is actually seeing the future and communicating with her future self. So it'll be interesting to go back later and re-watch what she says to herself in these moments. When Agatha admonishes her, she says,
"Witches like you are the reason people think we poison apples."
Which calls back to the witch in Snow White, which, as Brianna said, is in the closing credits of the show. She also admits her weakness.
I can't steal your magic unless you blast me with it.
And, as we saw in the Salem flashback, this is how Agatha destroyed her own coven. It could even be that this is the power that she acquired when she walked the Witch's Road. Lilia gives her a list of 4 names, but the last name is a black heart. Now, later we're meant to think that this is Mrs. Hart, Vision's boss's wife from the first episode of WandaVision.
Stop it.
But what if this is actually meant to represent Rio? After all, they need a green witch, and Rio's powers are green. And like I said, it could be Rio's hair in the locket, and the reason she has a heart here is because Agatha keeps that hair close to her heart. Deborah Jo Rupp could just be in the show as a comical misdirect, and her having a flourishing garden could be part of this misdirection. The heart could indicate that she and Rio were once in love, but now of course they are estranged. Then they meet the great Sashir Zameda, who frankly was underused when she was on SNL. She's playing Jennifer Kale, who runs one of those trendy snake oil shops that sells ridiculous items like probiotic candles.
Especially because you do have to burn them before ingestion. It's an FDA thing.
Jennifer Kale also has a complex history in the comics. She learned magic from a book of spells that was taken from Atlantis. This led her to teaming up with the Man-Thing, who we also saw in Werewolf by Night. Now, the Man-Thing is a guardian of the Nexus of All Realities, which we kind of saw in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So you can see how there are elements of this story that can lead to the Multiverse Saga and then can be followed up on in Avengers Doomsday or Avengers Secret Wars. And then the final member of the Coven is Alice Wu Gulliver, who is also from the comics. Just like in the show, her mother was a witch. Now, in the show, her mom is a rock star in a band called the Coral Shore, and in the comics, Alice becomes a cop who protects the Coral Shore in Hong Kong. In fact, the Alice in the show was a cop before she was taken off the force. Alice's mom had a huge hit called The Witch's Road, which was in the opening credits of episode 1. It also happens to be an incantation to summon the Witch's Road. Now, as Agatha is gathering her coven, she sees various animals watching her. Now, these are the members of the Salem 7. In the comics, they all have different powers, and some of them do resemble animals. Now, this is one area where I think the show drastically improves on the books. When we do finally see them later, they don't look silly, they are terrifying. So I really hope this kid, who, let's just call him Toto, ends up being Billy. Agatha was the twins' babysitter in the comics, and we see this reflected in the mentor relationship they have in this show. Also, I loved seeing this welcome sign he made with the pentagram.
Put it a little more to the other.
So the singing begins, and this entire cast can sing, except I'm not sure about Deborah Jo Rupp.
Am I supposed to know this song?
She is a great comedic actress, and I'm glad they found a way to keep using her after WandaVision. So the lyrics of the song are also episode titles, and I have a feeling that we'll be able to go back and assign meaning to all of the lyrics. For instance, lines like "marching ever forward 'neath the wooded shrine" definitely seem like they're foreshadowing something that happens in a future episode. For instance, they also sing "Gather sisters, fire, water, earth, and air" because each of these witches represents a different element. So I thought this was a kick-ass sequence. Suspenseful, the song is great, and Toto's fear balances it out and adds a really human element.
Is this the road? Because we should really go right now.
And I think the reason the spell doesn't work at first is because they didn't really have an Earth Witch, because Deborah Jo Rupp has no powers, and instead they needed Rio to walk the road with them. Finally, a door opens on the floor in the shape of a pentagon. Now, pentagons are figures often associated with black magic and witchcraft, but I also want to point out that Wanda's magic manifests as hexagons with 6 sides, which implies that her magic was just a little bit more extra than a typical witch's.
These go to 11.
So then we enter the Witch's Road. Now, roads like this are often associated with fairy tales, cautionary stories where there's always a witch or a wolf waiting at the end of the road. The Wizard of Oz was an extension of this idea. Dorothy is essentially a Dust Bowl Hansel and Gretel that gets lost in the woods and meets a witch. This is one of the few moments in an MCU project where I have genuinely no idea what's going to happen next, and I'm excited for this show. So just a reminder, everybody, to get tickets to our live show, click the link in the description and join our Discord. Well, guys, that's all the Easter eggs we caught, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.